Hi, my name is Pavlos Inglesis. I'm a chartered civil engineer and a chartered quality professional in the UK, and today we're going to explain what is the NCR in a construction project. Okay, we are going to start with a basic terminology. NCR stands for Non-Conformance or Non-Conformity Report, and it's simply a report that is used to capture, trace, record the repair process of issues that occurred in a construction site or generally in a construction project. NCR is one of the most fundamental tools for quality management and quality control in modern construction projects, but because it actually has a very bad reputation as an acronym in the industry, it is important to understand how it can actually be used in construction today and how a construction project and a construction company can benefit massively from its use. We can simply describe the NCR as a report that outlines what went wrong, this is the actual non-conformity, why it went wrong, root cause, what happened to mitigate the issue immediately, which is the correction, and what we can actually do in order to avoid that from happening again in the future, which is actually the corrective action. It's also important to note that NCR is mainly a mandatory process or procedure for a construction project or a company that needs to be ISO 9001 certified and compliant, as it is one of the key requirements of this standard. NCRs are extremely valuable tools in the construction industry because they are the main tools to learn from the mistakes of the past, and they are also the main vehicles towards the continuous improvement target of an ISO 9001 certified organization or a company. The construction industry has a very bad reputation for repeating the same mistakes without really caring that much. That wouldn't actually be a problem if it was not costing real money that can literally bring a construction company and a project to its complete closure and shut down, so it is extremely important for a construction project to learn from previous mishaps and failures. There are mainly two types of NCRs in construction. 1. Actual product non-conformities, which are mainly issues that affected the project or the building itself. For example, material failures, dimensional failures, or anything else that had a real impact on the actual built element. And there are also the procedural non-conformities, which are issues that did not have an immediate effect on the project or any built element, but they have been raised because a procedure was not followed in a construction project. For example, a document that has not been approved by the client, if that's a requirement, any hold points that were not followed, or a failure to comply with testing requirements and frequencies. If, for example, the requirement is to sample fresh concrete for cube testing on 28 days, compressive strength, and that did not happen, then this does not necessarily mean the concrete is bad, but the testing regime was not followed. The stages of an NCR in construction. Managing NCRs in a construction project can be very challenging because, especially in bigger projects, there are lots of stakeholders, designers, clients, suppliers, and even contractors and subcontractors that may be involved in an issue. To be honest, every construction company and every construction project has a different NCR process, and the procedure really depends on the size, the complexity, and the specific needs of a project. But in general, the stages of an NCR in construction can be as follows. First, it's the identification. This is where all the details of the issue must be recorded with as much evidence, any documents, photos, videos, records as possible. In this stage, it is also extremely important to mention the requirements that have not been followed or met with as much details and references as possible. Then, there is the root cause. This is a typical root cause analysis that is an exercise that must happen in every NCR that occurs and must also be recorded on the NCR form itself. It is important to note here that for smaller issues, a detailed root cause analysis might not be required unless it's a repeatable issue that becomes a trend. Then there is the remedy. This is the stage where all the corrections and the corrective actions are proposed, approved and recorded before they are actually done. The difference between the correction and the corrective action is very important, as the correction is something that is applied to fix the issue, usually within a few hours or a few days, but the corrective action must be taken to avoid it from happening again in the future, which is also the most important part of an NCR. And finally, there is the closure. This is the stage where the closure of the NCR happens. Evidence must be provided after both the correction and the corrective action have been implemented. In many cases, it can take months or even years, and it would be good if everything is signed off finally by a high authority person in the project company. Who decides what is a non-conformity or a non-conformance on a construction site? An NCR, or just a non-conformity, shouldn't be a decision of one person or entity. It has to be a fact with no debate at all. There is no grey area here. It's simply a black or white situation, as long as the requirement is clear. If everything in terms of design, requirements and specs are crystal clear since day one of a project, then there shouldn't be any discussion at all. However, dodgy contracts, last-minute requests, unfortunate conditions, bad planning and poor risk analysis can lead to endless discussions and arguments between contractors, designers, project managers and clients during the construction phase or even after it. This is not an ideal situation. As a result, contractors are pretty resistant to raising or opening a non-conformance NCR because there might be severe financial and commercial implications. It's not uncommon for a non-conformity to lead to significant claims and compensation events. In some contracts, these are also called defects and are very strong contractual elements. There is generally a blame culture around the NCRs. People don't like it when they have to recognize that they didn't do their job well, especially if we're talking about construction people with many years of experience on their shoulders. An NCR is actually admitting that, more or less, that they didn't do what they should have done and that they may have to correct it or even change the way they used to do things on site. A non-conformity might also be blocking the progress of the works, especially when it is directly linked with the next construction stage and it has to be closed or rectified before moving on. This might actually be catastrophic for the contractor if we're talking about an activity that is on the critical path. Also, depending on the project, there might be quite a lot of administrative work to be done for every NCR. Many clients require an in-depth root cause analysis, documents and forms to be completed, and even objective evidence to be attached for each single NCR. During the rush of the construction phase and when the clock is ticking, all of this may sound as a luxury and more like a paperwork exercise that everyone wants to avoid. So it makes sense if people don't really want to deal with NCRs at the end of the day. These are some typical NCRs in construction. Many things can actually go wrong in a construction project or a company, and this list can literally be endless. But to my experience, almost all quality NCRs that I have ever seen belong to one of the following categories. Something was not built as per the approved design drawings, or it's not within the tolerances specified in the design drawings. This is something that happens when there is usually poor document control in a construction project and the teams on site are not aware of the latest and most up-to-date construction drawings or other documents. The approved methodology, usually called a method statement, was not followed during the construction. Method statements are the most important documents for construction teams on a site, so if they are not followed to the letter, this is a major issue. The approved inspection and test plan (ITP) was not followed. The ITPs are usually neglected by the construction teams on a site, but they are equally important as they provide assurance that the elements that were built complying with the requirements. Any other approved documentation was not followed, such as quality procedures, instructions from the client, RFIs, or other. There are many more documents that construction teams must be aware of, and proper project management should coordinate all efforts in a construction project to make sure these are followed and are acknowledged by the relevant people. If this is not happening, then it should be raised as an NCR. A different material than the approved one was used on site. There are many projects where the material that must be installed somewhere has to go through an approval process as a contractual requirement. When this is not happening and materials are procured without any prior approvals, then this becomes an issue, especially on architectural elements that have to be sampled or benchmarked. A test on a material failed. In construction, there are many variants and irregular conditions that may lead to a material failure. One of the most common examples of this is concrete strength failures, which are quite common in construction. When this happens, it must be recorded, followed up and analyzed as an NCR. A design failure. The design was followed, but it was originally wrong. Even though it is quite rare, sometimes the design itself and its assumptions may fail, leading to minor or even worse, catastrophic failures. There are many safety factors applied in every design of construction activities, but even these sometimes are not enough. In these cases, an NCR must be used to record these issues. There is no available documentation to cover an activity, method statements, design drawings, ITPs, risk assessments, or other. All the existing documents do not describe the activity sufficiently. This is a very common situation that usually occurs in the beginning of a construction project when the teams are not yet familiar with all the documentation requirements as per the agreed contract. If that is the case, then NCRs must be raised to avoid this becoming a trend. The requirements for specific items were not precise and an RFI or design change was never issued. There are many cases where the design or the specifications are not detailed or accurate enough. If things are not clarified but are left to the construction teams to decide, then there will be discrepancies that would probably need to be rectified afterwards as NCRs. And finally, a contractual or statutory requirement that was not followed. There are many cases where the non-conformity is simply non-compliance with some other contractual or even statutory requirements. Usually, these requirements are covered by the design, the method statement, or the inspection test plans. But there can be some unfortunate cases where this is not true. How an NCR is closed. The usual process for NCRs is to open them and then close them in an agreed time frame. The ways an NCR can actually get closed are: A. Leave or use as is. This happens, or decided, when the designer, the client, or even the contractor agree that even though there is a defect somewhere, it is not affecting the project and it can be left as is after assessing the situation. B. Repair or rework. This happens when a complete rework or repair must be done in a specific element, which means extra time and money must be spent to bring it back to a compliant state. And C. Demolish or reject. This happens when the element must be completely removed from site and demolished because it needs to be built again from scratch. It goes without saying that this is a very difficult situation to be made by a project team, but unfortunately it may happen and it usually costs millions and a lot of time. NCRs in construction are some of the most important tools to manage quality control and even quality assurance, and basically to have a record for future reference in terms of learning a lesson in order to avoid similar mistakes and lapses. It is also a requirement of the ISO 9001 standard and a fundamental tool for continuous improvement for any construction company. It is also true that sometimes can be a burden and create unnecessary friction between the different stakeholders of a construction project. However, I would personally trust a project with 1,000 NCRs for its quality more than a project with 0 NCRs. At least, in the former, it can easily be proved that someone did check that requirements have been met.